Sarah Mitchell never imagined that her morning coffee would be interrupted by federal agents breaking down her door. The ceramic mug shattered on the kitchen floor as three men in dark suits burst into her modest apartment in Arlington, Virginia. Their badges gleamed under the fluorescent light, and their faces showed no emotion as they announced she was under arrest for espionage against the United States of America. The year was 1987, and Sarah worked as a translator for the State Department. She specialized in Russian and had spent the last 5 years helping diplomats navigate complex negotiations during the final years of the Cold War. Her colleagues knew her as a quiet, dedicated woman who arrived early and stayed late, meticulously translating documents that could shape the future of international relations. But now, as handcuffs clicked around her wrists, Sarah's world collapsed. The lead agent, a stern man named Detective Rodriguez, read her rights while his partners searched her apartment. They turned over every piece of furniture, emptied every drawer, and photographed everything from her grocery lists to her personal letters. "We have evidence that you've been passing classified information to Soviet contacts," Rodriguez said, his voice cold and professional. "Documents with your fingerprints were found in the possession of a known KGB operative." Sarah's mind raced. She had never betrayed her country. Every document she handled was processed according to strict protocols. She underwent regular security clearances and had never even spoken to anyone she suspected might be connected to foreign intelligence. The evidence against her seemed overwhelming. 3 separate classified documents had been found in the apartment of Viktor Petrov, a suspected Soviet spy who had been under surveillance for months. Each document bore Sarah's fingerprints and contained information she had translated just weeks before they appeared in enemy hands. The investigation revealed that Sarah had access to all 3 documents as part of her regular duties. Security cameras showed her working late on the nights before each document was discovered missing. Phone records indicated she had received several calls from untraceable numbers in the weeks leading up to her arrest. During her interrogation, FBI agent Lisa Chen presented the evidence piece by piece. The documents contained details about American negotiating positions in arms control talks, information that could give the Soviets a significant advantage in upcoming meetings. "Your fingerprints are on every page," Chen said, sliding photographs across the metal table. "You were the last person to handle these documents before they disappeared. The calls to your apartment came from phones we've traced to Soviet intelligence networks." Sarah stared at the evidence, her heart pounding. Everything pointed to her guilt, yet she knew with absolute certainty that she had never stolen those documents. She had never met Viktor Petrov. She had never spoken to anyone from Soviet intelligence. Her lawyer, David Park, had been assigned by the court. He was young and inexperienced, clearly overwhelmed by the complexity of the case. During their first meeting, he laid out the harsh reality she faced. "The prosecution has a strong case," he said, adjusting his glasses nervously. "Espionage charges carry a potential life sentence. If convicted, you could spend the rest of your life in prison. The evidence is circumstantial, but it's compelling." Sarah's family was devastated. Her elderly parents couldn't understand how their daughter, who had always been patriotic and law-abiding, could be accused of such crimes. Her younger brother, Michael, visited her in jail and struggled to hide his doubts. "Sarah, just tell me the truth," he said during one particularly difficult visit. "If you did something, if you made a mistake, we can work through this. But I need to know what really happened." The betrayal in his voice cut deeper than any accusation from the investigators. Sarah realized that even her own family was beginning to doubt her innocence. The evidence was simply too strong to ignore. Media attention exploded around the case. Newspapers ran headlines about the State Department spy, and television news programs featured expert analysis of how the security breach had occurred. Sarah's photograph appeared on front pages across the country, often alongside images of Viktor Petrov and the classified documents found in his possession. Public opinion quickly turned against her. Social media didn't exist yet, but radio call-in shows and letters to newspaper editors revealed widespread anger at what appeared to be a clear case of treason. Many callers demanded the death penalty for anyone who would betray their country during such a critical period in the Cold War. Inside the jail, Sarah faced hostility from other inmates who had seen her case on television. Guards treated her with suspicion and contempt. She spent most of her time in protective custody, isolated from the general population for her own safety. The psychological pressure was enormous. Sleep became impossible as Sarah replayed every day at work, trying to understand how the documents had been stolen. She examined every interaction with colleagues, every moment she had handled classified materials, searching for some explanation that might clear her name. Dr. Amanda Foster, a psychiatrist assigned to evaluate Sarah's mental state, found her to be coherent and genuinely confused by the charges. During their sessions, Sarah consistently maintained her innocence while showing clear signs of trauma from her sudden arrest and imprisonment. She exhibits none of the psychological markers we typically see in espionage cases, Dr. Foster noted in her report. Most spies show signs of guilt, rationalization, or ideological motivation. Sarah Mitchell appears genuinely bewildered by the evidence against her. Meanwhile, Viktor Petrov had disappeared. The FBI believed he had fled the country when he realized his network was under investigation. Without his testimony, prosecutors had to rely entirely on physical evidence and circumstantial connections to build their case against Sarah. The investigation expanded to include every aspect of Sarah's life. Agents interviewed her high school teachers, college professors, and former boyfriends. They examined her financial records going back 10 years, looking for any unusual payments that might indicate she was being paid for information. Nothing suspicious emerged from this background investigation. Sarah lived modestly on her government salary, had no debts, and showed no signs of sudden wealth or lifestyle changes. Her political views were mainstream, and she had never expressed any sympathy for communist ideology. But the physical evidence remained damning. 3 different forensic experts confirmed that the fingerprints on the stolen documents belonged to Sarah. The documents had been photographed in their original classified folders, proving they had been removed from secure State Department facilities. As her trial date approached, Sarah's legal team struggled to develop a defense strategy. Without access to the specifics of how the documents were discovered or detailed information about the ongoing investigation into Soviet intelligence networks, they were fighting blind. David Park filed numerous motions seeking additional discovery materials, but most were denied on national security grounds. The prosecution argued that revealing more details about their investigation would compromise ongoing counterintelligence operations. The stress began taking a severe physical toll on Sarah. She lost 20 pounds in 2 months and developed chronic insomnia. Medical examinations revealed high blood pressure and signs of severe anxiety. Yet she continued to maintain her innocence, even when offered plea deals that would have reduced her potential sentence significantly. "I won't confess to something I didn't do," she told David during one of their strategy sessions. "I know it looks bad, but somewhere out there is the real explanation for how this happened. We just have to find it." Her faith in the justice system was being tested every day, but Sarah refused to give up hope that the truth would eventually emerge. She had no way of knowing that the real explanation for the evidence against her was far more dangerous and complex than anyone involved in her case could have imagined. The preliminary hearings revealed just how strong the prosecution's case appeared to be. Expert witnesses testified about the security procedures at the State Department and how difficult it would be for someone without authorized access to obtain the stolen documents. The prosecution painted a picture of Sarah as having both the opportunity and the means to commit espionage. As the first phase of her legal battle concluded, Sarah faced the terrifying reality that she might spend the rest of her life in prison for crimes she hadn't committed. The evidence against her seemed insurmountable, and even her own defense team was struggling to maintain confidence in her innocence. But deep in the shadows of the intelligence world, forces were already in motion that would eventually reveal the truth behind Sarah Mitchell's case. The real story was far more dangerous than a simple case of espionage, and when it finally emerged, it would shake the foundations of American intelligence operations and expose a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of government. The path to that truth would be long and treacherous, requiring courage from unexpected allies and sacrifices that Sarah couldn't yet imagine. Her fight for justice was just beginning, and the stakes were higher than anyone realized. 3 weeks after Sarah's arrest, an envelope arrived at the Washington Post newsroom addressed to investigative reporter James Walsh. Inside was a single photograph and a typed note. "Sarah Mitchell is innocent. The real traitor is still free. Look deeper into the State Department's Russian desk. Trust no one in authority." James had covered intelligence stories for 15 years and recognized the signs of a genuine leak. The photograph showed Viktor Petrov, the alleged Soviet spy, sitting in a restaurant with someone whose face had been carefully blocked out. The timestamp indicated it was taken 2 days before Sarah's arrest, when Petrov was supposedly in hiding. James began his own investigation quietly, starting with Sarah's background. What he discovered didn't match the profile of a traitor. Her parents were second-generation Polish immigrants who had fled communist oppression. Her grandfather had died in Soviet labor camps. Her entire family history suggested someone who would despise the Soviet system, not serve it. Meanwhile, Sarah's trial preparation revealed troubling inconsistencies in the prosecution's timeline. David Park, working with a team of volunteer lawyers who had begun to doubt the official story, discovered that the security logs at the State Department showed gaps on the nights when the documents were allegedly stolen. "Look at this," David said, pointing to printouts spread across the conference table. According to these logs, the building's security system was offline for maintenance on all 3 nights when the documents went missing. But maintenance records show no scheduled work on those dates. The volunteer legal team included retired prosecutor Helen Chang, who had extensive experience with espionage cases. She immediately recognized the significance of this discrepancy. "In my 30 years prosecuting national security cases, I've never seen security systems conveniently offline during document thefts," Helen said. "This suggests either incredible incompetence or deliberate manipulation." James Walsh's investigation led him to speak with current and former State Department employees under conditions of strict confidentiality. What emerged was a picture of growing tension within the Russian translation department. Several translators had been reassigned or fired in recent months, officially for budget reasons, but unofficially amid whispers of security concerns. One former translator, speaking anonymously, told James about unusual procedures that had been implemented by the department's security chief, Marcus Webb. New protocols required certain documents to be handled only by specific personnel, and Webb had personally overseen many of these restricted assignments. "It was strange," the former translator said, during their clandestine meeting in a downtown coffee shop. "Webb would sometimes take documents directly from our desks, saying they needed immediate security review. We never saw those documents again, and when we asked about them, we were told they had been declassified or returned to their originating departments." James decided to investigate Marcus Webb's background. What he found was troubling. Webb had joined the State Department only 2 years earlier after a career in private security. His references checked out, but James noticed that Webb's previous employers had all been small firms that were difficult to trace. More concerning was Webb's lifestyle. Despite his government salary, Webb lived in an expensive Georgetown townhouse and drove a luxury car. When James discreetly inquired about Webb's finances, he discovered that Webb had recently purchased the townhouse with cash, claiming the money came from an inheritance. The breakthrough came when James received a second anonymous tip, this time directing him to examine Webb's travel records. Using his media credentials and contacts within government records departments, James discovered that Webb had taken several unexplained trips to Europe in the months before Sarah's arrest. Cross-referencing these trips with Viktor Petrov's known movements, James found a disturbing pattern. Webb had been in Vienna on the same days as Petrov on 3 separate occasions. Vienna was a known meeting place for intelligence operatives from both sides during the Cold War. Helen Chang recognized the significance immediately when James shared his findings with Sarah's defense team. "This is classic tradecraft," she explained. "Vienna meetings, cash payments, lifestyle beyond salary means Webb fits the profile of a turned asset much better than Sarah Mitchell." But proving Webb's guilt wouldn't be easy. The evidence was largely circumstantial, and Webb held a position of authority that would make accusations against him extremely difficult to pursue. Moreover, any investigation into Webb would likely be blocked on national security grounds. Dr. Foster, the psychiatrist who had evaluated Sarah, provided another crucial piece of the puzzle. During her sessions with Sarah, she had administered standard psychological tests used to detect deception. Sarah had passed all of them convincingly. "In my professional opinion," Dr. Foster wrote in a supplemental report, "Sarah Mitchell shows no indicators of deception or the psychological markers typically associated with espionage activity. Her distress appears genuine and consistent with someone who has been falsely accused." The defense team faced a critical decision. They could focus on creating reasonable doubt about Sarah's guilt, or they could actively pursue the theory that Marcus Webb was the real traitor. The first approach was safer, but might not be enough to overcome the physical evidence. The second approach was riskier, but could potentially expose the truth. Helen Chang advocated for the more aggressive strategy. "We can't just poke holes in their case," she argued during a late-night strategy session. "We need to present an alternative theory that explains all the evidence. If Webb is the real spy, then he would have had access to plant evidence and manipulate the investigation." Meanwhile, James Walsh's reporting had attracted attention from other journalists, but it had also triggered a response from the intelligence community. James began noticing signs that he was under surveillance. His phone calls seemed to echo. His apartment showed signs of being searched, and unmarked cars appeared outside his office building. The pressure on James intensified when his editor, Robert Stone, called him into a private meeting. Stone had received calls from high-ranking officials requesting that the newspaper cease its investigation into the Sarah Mitchell case. "They're saying this could compromise ongoing national security operations," Stone explained, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. "I need you to be absolutely certain about your sources and your facts before we publish anything." James understood the subtext. Powerful people wanted his investigation stopped, which suggested he was getting close to something important. He decided to accelerate his research and began working around the clock to document Webb's suspicious activities. The next break came from an unexpected source. Dr. Amanda Rivers, a forensic expert who had analyzed the fingerprint evidence, contacted Helen Chang with troubling observations about the physical evidence. "I've been reviewing the fingerprint analysis," Dr. Rivers explained during their confidential meeting. "The prints on the documents are definitely Sarah's, but there are some unusual characteristics that weren't included in the original report." Dr. Rivers had discovered that while the fingerprints were genuine, they showed signs of having been transferred to the documents rather than made through natural handling. The pressure patterns and oil residue suggested the prints had been lifted from other surfaces and applied to the classified papers. This would require sophisticated techniques and access to materials typically available only to intelligence professionals, Dr. Rivers explained. "It's not something an amateur could accomplish." This revelation transformed the defense team's understanding of the case. If Sarah's fingerprints had been artificially placed on the documents, then someone with technical expertise and access to her personal items had deliberately framed her. Marcus Webb, as head of security for the Russian desk, would have had access to items Sarah had handled. He would also have had the technical knowledge and resources needed to transfer fingerprints convincingly. Most importantly, he would have been able to manipulate the security systems and investigation procedures to ensure the evidence pointed toward Sarah. But proving this theory in court would require more than circumstantial evidence and expert testimony. The defense team needed concrete proof of Webb's treachery and his role in framing Sarah. James Walsh made a dangerous decision. He would attempt to gather direct evidence of Webb's activities, even if it meant putting himself at risk. Using contacts in the intelligence community who had grown suspicious of Webb's behavior, James arranged for discreet surveillance of Webb's activities. What they discovered confirmed their worst fears. Webb was indeed meeting regularly with foreign contacts, using sophisticated communication methods to avoid detection. He had been systematically stealing classified documents and selling them to Soviet intelligence for over 2 years. Sarah Mitchell had been chosen as a scapegoat because her position gave her access to the stolen documents, and her background made her an unlikely suspect who would be difficult to defend. Webb had carefully manipulated the evidence to ensure that all indicators would point towards Sarah while deflecting suspicion from himself. The conspiracy went deeper than anyone had imagined. Webb had accomplices within the intelligence community who had helped cover his tracks and ensure that the investigation would focus exclusively on Sarah. These accomplices had manipulated security procedures, destroyed evidence that might have revealed Webb's guilt, and blocked attempts to examine alternative theories. As the defense team prepared to reveal this information, they realized they were facing more than just a wrongful prosecution case. They were confronting a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of American intelligence operations, and the forces arrayed against them would stop at nothing to prevent the truth from emerging. Sarah remained in jail, unaware of the complex conspiracy that had destroyed her life. Her faith in the justice system continued to erode as her trial date approached, and the evidence against her seemed to solidify. She had no way of knowing that brave people were risking their lives and careers to expose the truth and clear her name. The stage was set for a confrontation that would determine not only Sarah's fate, but also the future of intelligence operations within the American government. The real battle for justice was just beginning, and the stakes couldn't have been higher. The breakthrough came at 3 a.m. on a rainy Thursday morning when James Walsh received a call from his intelligence community contact, who identified himself only as Guardian. Guardian had managed to obtain recordings of Webb's communications with his Soviet handlers, along with financial records showing payments from foreign accounts. "Meet me at the Lincoln Memorial at sunrise," Guardian said, his voice tense with urgency. "Come alone and make sure you're not followed. What I'm about to give you will either save Sarah Mitchell or get us both killed." James arrived at the memorial as dawn broke over Washington, finding Guardian already waiting by the statue's base. The man appeared to be in his 50s, with graying hair and the alert eyes of someone who had spent decades in intelligence work. He handed James a thick envelope without ceremony. "Inside are photographs, recordings, and financial documents proving Webb's guilt," Guardian explained. "But there's something else you need to know. Webb isn't working alone. He has protection from Deputy Director Raymond Foster at the CIA. Foster has been covering Webb's activities in exchange for a share of the payments." The revelation hit James like a physical blow. If a high-ranking CIA official was involved in the conspiracy, then Sarah's case was part of a much larger intelligence scandal that could shake the government to its foundations. "Why are you helping me?" James asked. Guardian's expression grew grim. "Because I've watched good people destroyed by corruption for too long. Sarah Mitchell is innocent, and she's about to spend her life in prison while the real traitors continue their work. That's not the America I swore to protect." Armed with this evidence, James immediately contacted Helen Chang and the defense team. The materials Guardian had provided were explosive: recorded conversations between Webb and his handlers, bank records showing payments from Swiss accounts, and most damning of all, photographs of Webb meeting with known Soviet intelligence officers. But the evidence also confirmed their worst fears about the scope of the conspiracy. Deputy Director Foster had used his position to block FBI investigations that might have exposed Webb's activities. He had personally intervened to ensure that Sarah Mitchell became the focus of the espionage investigation while protecting Webb from scrutiny. Helen Chang recognized that they were now facing opponents who would use any means necessary to protect themselves. "We're not just fighting a wrongful prosecution anymore," she told the team during an emergency meeting. "We're taking on people who have the power to destroy evidence, intimidate witnesses, and possibly eliminate threats to their operation." The decision was made to go public immediately, before Foster and his associates could react. James Walsh worked through the night to prepare a comprehensive exposé for publication in the Washington Post, while the legal team prepared to present their evidence to federal prosecutors who were not involved in the original investigation. But Foster struck first. The morning before James's article was scheduled to publish, FBI agents raided his apartment and the newspaper's offices, claiming to be investigating leaks of classified information. They seized James's computers, files, and the evidence Guardian had provided. "They're trying to bury the story," James told his editor Robert Stone during a tense phone call. "But I've got copies of everything hidden in multiple locations. They can't stop the truth from coming out." The raid backfired spectacularly. Instead of suppressing the story, it attracted attention from other media outlets and members of Congress who began questioning why such aggressive tactics were being used against journalists investigating an espionage case. Senator Margaret Collins, who chaired the Senate Intelligence Committee, was particularly disturbed by the raids. She had been following Sarah's case and had grown increasingly suspicious about the prosecution's refusal to allow congressional oversight of the investigation. When government agencies start raiding newsrooms to suppress stories about espionage cases, something is seriously wrong, Senator Collins announced at a hastily called press conference. "I'm ordering an immediate investigation into the entire Sarah Mitchell case and the conduct of all agencies involved." The congressional investigation opened floodgates that Foster and Webb couldn't control. Guardian emerged from the shadows to testify before a closed session of the Senate Intelligence Committee, providing detailed evidence of the conspiracy. Other intelligence professionals, inspired by Guardian's courage, came forward with additional information about corruption and abuse within the intelligence community. Dr. Rivers, the forensic expert who had discovered the fingerprint manipulation, was granted protective custody after receiving death threats. Her testimony to congressional investigators provided scientific proof that Sarah had been deliberately framed using sophisticated intelligence techniques. Under enormous pressure from Congress and mounting public outrage, the Justice Department appointed a special prosecutor to investigate the entire case. Special Prosecutor Linda Martinez was a former federal judge with an impeccable reputation and no connections to the intelligence agencies involved in the scandal. Martinez's investigation moved quickly once she had access to the evidence James Walsh and Guardian had compiled. Within 2 weeks, she had obtained warrants for Webb's arrest and for searches of his properties and financial records. The search of Webb's Georgetown townhouse revealed a sophisticated spy operation. Hidden in his basement were encrypted communication devices, cameras for photographing documents, and, most damaging of all, a collection of Sarah Mitchell's personal items, including coffee cups and pens from which her fingerprints could have been lifted. Webb was arrested while attempting to flee the country. At Dulles Airport, security agents found him carrying false passports and a briefcase containing classified documents he had been planning to deliver to his handlers. But Webb's arrest triggered the most dangerous phase of the conspiracy. Deputy Director Foster, realizing that his involvement was about to be exposed, made a desperate attempt to eliminate the witnesses who could destroy him. Guardian survived an apparent car accident that investigators later determined was a deliberate assassination attempt. James Walsh found himself under constant protection after his apartment was broken into and his car's brake lines were cut. Dr. Rivers was relocated to a secure facility when surveillance detected suspicious individuals near her home. The pressure on Foster intensified when Webb, facing life in prison, agreed to cooperate with the special prosecutor's investigation. In exchange for a reduced sentence, he provided detailed testimony about Foster's role in the conspiracy and his connections to other corrupt officials within the intelligence community. Foster's arrest came during a dramatic confrontation at CIA headquarters. As federal marshals arrived with warrants, Foster barricaded himself in his office and attempted to destroy computer files containing evidence of his treachery. Security footage showed him frantically feeding documents into a shredder even as agents broke down his door. The scope of Foster's corruption was staggering. Over 5 years, he had sold intelligence to multiple foreign governments, compromised ongoing operations, and used his position to eliminate rivals and threats to his network. Sarah Mitchell was just one of several innocent people who had been framed or destroyed to protect his activities. For Sarah, vindication came on a cold December morning when Special Prosecutor Martinez personally visited her in jail to inform her that all charges were being dropped. After 8 months in custody, Sarah was finally free, but the ordeal had taken a severe toll on her physical and mental health. "I never lost faith that the truth would come out," Sarah told reporters gathered outside the jail, her voice weak but determined. "But I never imagined the truth would be this terrible. These people weren't just trying to destroy me. They were betraying everything our country stands for." The aftermath of the scandal led to the largest intelligence community reforms in decades. Congress passed new oversight legislation requiring independent monitoring of counterintelligence operations. Procedures for handling classified materials were completely overhauled to prevent the kind of manipulation that had been used to frame Sarah. Webb received a life sentence without parole for espionage and conspiracy. Foster was sentenced to 40 years in prison for treason, conspiracy, and the attempted murder of witnesses. 3 other officials involved in covering up their activities received sentences ranging from 15 to 25 years. James Walsh received a Pulitzer Prize for his investigative reporting, but he was more proud of the role his work had played in saving an innocent woman and exposing a dangerous conspiracy. Guardian was quietly relocated with a new identity, his service to his country recognized only by a small group of people who knew the truth about his courage. Dr. Rivers returned to her forensic work with enhanced security procedures and a renewed commitment to ensuring that scientific evidence could never again be manipulated to frame innocent people. Her analysis techniques became the standard for detecting artificially planted evidence in criminal cases. Helen Chang was appointed to a federal judgeship, where she used her experience from Sarah's case to ensure that defendants in national security cases received proper representation and fair trials. Her work became a model for defending citizens against government overreach. Sarah Mitchell eventually returned to government service, but in a different capacity. She became an advocate for intelligence community reform, working within the State Department to implement new safeguards against the kind of corruption that had nearly destroyed her life. The scars from her ordeal never fully healed. Sarah continued to struggle with anxiety and trust issues long after her vindication, but she found purpose in ensuring that other innocent people would never face the nightmare she had endured. "The most dangerous threat to our democracy isn't external enemies," Sarah said during a speech at Georgetown University 5 years after her release. "It's the corruption of the people we trust to protect us. When those guardians become the threat, ordinary citizens must have the courage to stand up for truth, no matter how powerful their opponents might be." The Sarah Mitchell case became a watershed moment in American intelligence history, demonstrating both the dangers of unchecked power and the resilience of democratic institutions when good people refuse to accept injustice. Years later, when former Soviet intelligence files were declassified, researchers discovered that Webb and Foster's network had caused more damage to American national security than any previous espionage ring in history. Their betrayal had compromised hundreds of operations and put countless lives at risk. But the case also proved that even the most sophisticated conspiracies couldn't survive when brave individuals chose truth over personal safety. Guardian's decision to come forward, James Walsh's determination to pursue the story, and Helen Chang's refusal to accept the official narrative had saved not only Sarah Mitchell, but also the integrity of American intelligence operations. The conspiracy to frame Sarah Mitchell had been more dangerous than anyone initially imagined, but the truth had ultimately prevailed through the courage of ordinary people who refused to let injustice triumph. Their legacy continues to protect innocent citizens and preserve the democratic values that make such courage both necessary and possible.